sometimes criminals are just so sneaky.
We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about the 3 most common reasons we see the ATF visit folks at their homes. Now, you're not going to want to miss any of these because we talk about some easy ways that these things get resolved and how you can be prepared for these situations. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button and consider becoming a channel member, linked in the description below. But that brings us to our first most common reason we see folks kind of get tangled up with the ATF. They come knocking on your door. And what is that, Em?
Yeah, and this is, I think, the one we see as being the most dangerous for you as the person who is having to deal with the ATF, and that is that you have multiple purchases of the same type of firearm over like a pretty close period of time. We see it generally within a month, a couple months, maybe even a year. But, you know, what the ATF is looking for is essentially, I see that Richard has bought 9 Glock 19s, right, over the course of the last month. He probably doesn't use all those in his personal collection. What is he doing with them? Maybe he's trying to be an unlicensed seller. So they're going to show up and they're going to say, hey, Richard, we're going to need to see all 9 of those Glock 19s. So cough them up. Yeah,
and when you don't have an inventory of, you know, a lot of the similarly purchased firearms, we see this a lot with, you know, if you buy the same type of AR or the same type of handgun, if a lot of those have left your possession, it raises a suspicion of, hey, look, this person is acting as an unlicensed dealer. They're acting as, you know, they're dealing in the business and commerce of firearms, and they don't have a federal firearms license, which can get you in real hot water. The remedy to this is, you know, some people, I have a friend who was a collector and he just wanted every variation of the same firearm. You know, if they're all in your inventory, if they haven't left your possession, then that's a real easy fix. Obviously, you'll want to speak to an attorney, but, you know, we see that come up from time to time.
And I've seen it happen with as few as 4 firearms of the same type. I don't know what your experience has been.
The lowest number I've seen is maybe 6.
6. And, you know, I mean, I will say I did buy 2. I bought 2 Glock 43s at one point, one for me, one as a gift to a family member. Easily explainable, and the ATF never showed up at my door for 2 purchases within a short period of time.
And I think that brings us to number 2, the second most common reason we see the ATF come and visit people at their homes, and that's if the firearm is recovered at a crime scene. Now, it could come up in a lot of different scenarios, but if you didn't, you know, sell the gun, and the gun, let's say, was stolen, and it shows that at a crime scene, the ATF comes up and they say, hey, you know, they perform what's called a firearms trace. They look at the serial number of the firearm located at the crime scene. They go to the manufacturer, say, hey, manufacturer, who'd you distribute this firearm to? Go to distributor. Hey, distributor, what FFL did you transfer this to? And then they go to the FFL and say, hey, FFL, you know, who was the point of sale? Who did this firearm? Who did you sell this firearm to? And when they come back to the first person who purchased this firearm, if they don't have, you know, some documentation of where the firearm went, it can cause some problems. So what do you tell your clients?
Yeah, that when you have a gun lost or stolen, you absolutely, now speak to an attorney first, but assuming you didn't have it lost or stolen someplace you weren't supposed to have it, or there are other sort of scenarios we're on the lookout for. Yeah, there are times when we'll tell you not to report, but generally speaking, most people can and should report the loss or theft of that firearm as quickly as they realize it's gone. This will stop this activity, this trace activity, because when they, you know, crunch that serial number, they're going to see it pop up in the lost and stolen gun database. Know when your connection to the firearm was severed. It is a good, quick, easy fix.
Yeah, and if it doesn't show up in the lost and stolen property database for whatever reason, let's say they come knocking on your door and you say, hey, look, on this day I reported it to this agency and here's the case number. You know, that kind of breaks the chain of custody at that point, and it really, you know, wraps these things up, or your involvement in that investigation. So that's a great point, Emily.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to our third one, which is that you sold a gun which has wound up either at a crime scene or in the hands of a criminal, or for those of us down here in border states wound up in Mexico, because that's something that we see quite a bit as well. The ATF comes knocking.
And what's important about this is documenting the sale of your firearms. You know, assuming that private sales are legal, you'll want to document that. You know, make, model, serial number, the person that you're transferring it to, maybe some kind of statement that you're both qualified to purchase and possess firearms. Because if you do not have a bill of sale and the ATF comes knocking at your door and says, hey, you know, this gun showed up next to a dead politician in Mexico. I know y'all have heard me say that before. That's a real scenario. Where did it go? And you say, I sold it. and you don't have any documentation to back that up, that can cause some problems.
Yeah, to a guy, I didn't ever get his name is not a good answer as far as the ATF is concerned. Now, there's also, you can breathe a little bit easier in that it's possible you could sell a gun to someone who intends to go out and commit a crime with it, and you haven't necessarily committed a crime yourself unless you generally have reason to know that that person is, prohibited or is going to use it in the commission of a criminal offense. And sometimes criminals are just so sneaky. You don't know. You can be selling to the bad guy and it's not your fault and you're not going to be criminally liable for it. But that bill of sale can still be helpful in that moment. Like, look, he told me he was qualified. I had no idea.
Maybe I didn't look at his license to carry or his permit to carry a concealed handgun.
I made sure he was a resident of my same state. I looked at his license. I've got his name. Here's the info. Please get off my doorstep is the next step there. But it really can be helpful in that scenario. And that is a scenario we see come up, unfortunately, fairly frequently.
Yeah. And, with most law enforcement interactions, you don't want to be communicating to them without legal representation. And I would say that's kind of the caveat to each of these three scenarios. You want to speak to an attorney about your particular circumstances for your legal rights and maybe for the safety of your dogs in your household. You don't want to be talking to the ATF without, legal representation. But
oh, sure. I can say, I had someone call in once who definitely sold a firearm to a criminal unlawfully, who he knew was going to take it down and traffic it to Mexico. And then when the ATF called him afterwards about it, he called us and said, well, should I report it as stolen now? It's like, no, you shouldn't. You sold it. You dispossessed yourself of it. Right. Reporting it after the ATF calls you isn't going to help you. So definitely call a lawyer. Every situation is totally different and unique, and only someone licensed in your state can help you through that.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please continue to question and comment below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.